I asked Mike Boland to join us because Mike's really our specialist when it comes to mobile and location types of issues. And Phil, that's really where you've been focusing mostly the last couple of years, although you've covered the gamut. Is this conference in the end, is it something that's all about data and all about location? Is that what we're talking about in terms of the next wave of these types of national local things?
I think it's timely for a large part of the market. There are fundamentals, and I was really pleased to hear a lot of the best practices being shared with the audience. So I think the program as well as the discussion was quite good. I heard a couple of things outside of the program that I found very interesting. So for example, just to illustrate the breadth and importance of what you guys are focused on here, the speaker from General Mills talking not only about store visits and basket size, which obviously are important metrics, but also enabling consumers, for example, to put together ingredients for a meal quickly at home, and thinking about how to advise their clients and assemble that package so that someone literally can pull it off the shelf. So I think in addition to local location, all the things we're talking about around targeting, really thinking more broadly about ways to use these data to personalize and enable consumers to attack their three objectives, which often are, how do I save time, how do I save money, and hopefully have an enjoyable experience on top of that.
So Phil, are you seeing any change in attitude or adoption on the buy side, and particularly among brands, to utilize location, utilize mobile, utilize big data, all of these tools we're talking about? Because for a long time what I see happening is that some of them are very set in their ways, and kind of some of these newfangled technologies maybe scare them away. The bell curve we talked about in the last session, but also because a traditional objective of a lot of these advertisers has been reach. Mm-hmm. And when we start to talk about location segmentation, that means you're sacrificing reach for the benefit of what might be more resonant or just higher performing advertising.
Yes.
So it's a trade-off.
Yes.
But still, you see a lot of brands that are stuck in that reach-driven mindset. So are you seeing a change there to do that trade-off?
I think so. I would agree with your points. You've written about the trade-off, I think, quite eloquently. I think what we're beginning to see is brands in different parts of companies recognize that it's not one objective or one medium or even one campaign, but instead a combination of them. And indeed, as we think about, I have written a piece called 8 Layers of Location, which range from macro down to literally granular, where location is embedded in a product or at the shelf. And there's no single point along that continuum, but we see, for example, quite effective platforms and campaigns driven by solutions like Moment Feed, for example. So it's not individualized, which is really where you encounter the difficulties, but it's localized, so it still appears more relevant, which is a key criterion here. But again, it's at scale, if you will.
It achieves the national scale, but customized per zip code or whatever the
and
is.
localized is much better than something that's impersonal and generic, and it may never be as good as individualized, but there's also that creepy line between walking in and saying, hi, Dr. Hendrix, would you like what you had yesterday? Not sure that we all want to go there. So there's a balance both from the brand manager but also from the individual.
Now, speaking of the balance, one thing that struck me during the last 3 days is that there's a great degree of variance per company when you talk about multi-location businesses, and the variance is between the degree to which the ad budget and the ad management is happening at a central level, corporate-wise, or at a decentralized level. And I like what Leah Pringle at Aflac said in that there's really no right answer somewhere in between that sliding scale, but you want to be able to allow the personalization at that local level, especially with something like insurance agents. It's sold on kind of a personality, but also the brand consistency, the brand quality control at a corporate level. So how do you achieve both of those? And I think their solution is interesting, where they're providing a tool set to each of these agents so that it's within a certain range of that brand consistency, but also allows a certain degree of each location to do their own thing, so to speak.
So I missed that talk, but it's interesting. Over the last couple of days, I've had a client visiting as part of a larger engagement. We've been meeting with firms that are broadly in the big data arena, and one of the firms specializes in AI, artificial intelligence. And quite frankly, I don't know a lot about it, but it intrigued me to understand how do we take the outputs from these big data solutions and equip individuals,
Yeah.
whether they're reps or others, to really make use of that information. What I came to understand is that there's a lot of stuff that can be automated and should be automated. There are certain things that you want a combination with a human being
Yeah.
looking over the solution and adapting it in real time. So, but having said that, there's so many things that can be automated. We're a long way from capitalizing on the potential there.
We had a major session yesterday on the transformation of retail. And one thing that didn't come up at all was the potential of beacons, or the ability to actually see who's walking by and maybe, getting a coupon for a discount on Gillette razor, that kind of thing. You've been doing a lot of work with beacons and other things. How important is it? What's the timeline? I mean, how much do we have to pay attention to it?
I think we have to pay a lot of attention to it, and the timeline is difficult to predict. So I do work with a number of startups, one of which is focused on this area. So I've been deeply immersed in it over the last couple of months, and quite frankly, we're just in the very, very early stages, perhaps not even the first inning, just getting into the batter's box there. But if you think about it, it does offer the potential to allow the consumer to interact with and receive information at a point of time, point of need, that's very relevant, whether it's in the grocery store or some other type of store. I think the challenges obviously involve understanding enough about not just the consumer, but their context. There's a term used that I'd recommend highly if you're not familiar with it, called jobs to be done. Are they there, again, to get in and out quickly? Or are they there to learn about and perhaps discover what's popular? So if you think about shopping, it's clearly not homogeneous. In fact, I refer to this as the bifurcation of shopping. We really need to understand context. So I think beacons have an important role, but critical in that role is to understand what mission, if you will, the consumer is on at that particular point in time. And that's not a static characteristic. Occasionally, but generally it's because I'm lost in the grocery store. I'm rarely serendipitous unless my wife has called and said, what would you like for dinner? And then we're both puzzled over that question and looking for ideas and recommendations. So I think context is critical, personalization is critical. We still haven't figured out how to position and communicate these kinds of technologies, though. So that's a big challenge.
I think that experimentation is going to be key to your point about being so early, and to what degree are consumers ready to be or amenable to be either interrupted or to be engaged when in store. And another thing that's often forgotten whenever we're talking about the opportunity with beacons is they're usually run on their Bluetooth low energy for energy savings and other nuts and bolts benefits I won't get into now, but Bluetooth has to be turned on, it has to be an opt-in, it has to be at the app layer as kind of the touch point. So I think that value chain of the technology, the device, the app, all of those talking to each other, and then the user opting in are the nuts and bolts that I think are going to need to be worked out. And at what point do you get a user to opt in? What is the reward? It's going to be exciting to watch, but you're right, we're so early.
I think it's a great point. One of the questions I've been posing to both companies I've been interviewing, but also my client, the startup, is where is the value the need and value so significant that this becomes irresistible?
Right.
I'll go through the steps to figure out how to use this. So, for example, occasionally I'll buy wine, and I know nothing about wine. It's that along with yogurt, which I find just bewildering, particularly if I'm buying for other family members, trying to remember what is it they like, because I always get the wrong thing. But wine, how many of us are connoisseurs? Not many, and yet it's an important purchase. It's relatively expensive. And of course, we're serving wine to guests, so it represents something about us. So we want to make the right choice. So in addition to looking for offers, which are on the shelves, I'd probably like some advice there.
Yeah.
And the numbers mean something to someone. So I think there are specific use cases where we'll find something like beacons. This is typical of new technologies. Where are the use cases that are so compelling, some number of early adopters find it irresistible. And then it catches on and spreads to others in the population.
Sporting events, I think, will be a big one. You see a lot of early adopters, Fenway Park, other parks. I think that's one venue we might see it, in addition to retail.
And that's a great example of beacons really enhancing the experience. Yeah. So, probably if you did a word cloud on the discussion presentations, it'd be an interesting question for the audience, but I suspect Target is the number one. So if we sort of move away from that mindset to thinking about in fact, I'm writing about this now. How do you think about the customer? If you think about them as a target, then everything looks like a nail. You've got a hammer. Yeah. But if we think about them, for example, as a guest, and then we think, how do we use these technologies to enhance, enrich their experience? It opens up a lot of possibilities.
Phil, our next event is our SMB digital marketing event. It's in New Orleans in September. So you've been following this space. What do you think is the most important thing that we should try to tackle at our event in September?
For SMBs?
Yeah.
Boy, I think the comments made on the previous panel about SMBs having to juggle so many different things is critical, and really understanding where mobile fits, not only in terms of marketing, but obviously operations as well. And understanding operations from a broad standpoint. So again, as marketers, we tend to focus on a subset, but there's so many other opportunities for marketers to engage with both existing customers as well as prospects. So I'd take a broad view and think holistically about marketing, and within that loyalty, but then on the operations side of the business, ways in which they can integrate mobile in ways that equip not only the owner, manager, but their salespeople and even the frontline people.
Phil, I think that's an excellent point about operations too, because besides all the benefits you just mentioned, using big data to improve operations, what dish should I serve on Wednesdays, as opposed to the sales and marketing discussion we always have, SMBs famously have high churn when it comes to advertising and marketing tools and products. Once you get in at that operational level and help them to that degree, it's a deeper lock-in and the churn goes down. And I think and a lot of these things are very, it's a good marriage between marketing and operations. When you talk about payment processing and marketing, for example, those go together great.
Yes.
So you have reps already out selling these marketing things for which operations tie closely to it and reduce churn. So I think when combining those factors, just to add to your point about operations, I'm glad you said that, because I think it's a good play for everyone.
And I think SMBs are a unique market because, again, as we've said throughout the session, most of the consumer purchases are made locally. But more importantly, if we have a relationship, more often than not, it's with our local dry cleaners or sub shop or whatever it happens to be, where they get to know us. So the integration of these technologies that allow them to personalize it even more becomes more natural. We're more apt to trust them with data and a whole range of things. It may be less necessary in the eyes of the customer, but I think from the SMB perspective, it's equally, if not more important.
Well, Phil, thank you for joining us on stage. We really appreciate having you here. And thanks to all of you who have stuck it out. We hope that today was just as good as the other days. I think it's some of the most interesting things we've pursued.